So what's our relationship with new technologies? Think about each individual technology that comes to play. How do we think about it? Do we think about it as something that we can improve our way of working? Or do we think about it a way that an attacker is going to use against our way of working? Welcome to my world. That's what we do on a day-to-day basis, is think through how are the new technologies going to be used to defeat mechanisms, right? But I didn't always think this way, right? In industry, I used to think, how can we improve processes, right? Automate things, routine tasks that we would otherwise want to have automated, or advance timelines that we want to advance, right? We just saw a great discussion about AI in different areas where it can be employed, right? This is our thinking. But turns out, the attacker is thinking the same way too, right? But when it comes to the attacker, the interesting thing is they're not necessarily thinking about new outcomes like we are. They're thinking about new ways of achieving the same outcome, like fraud. So if we think of it that way, it's helpful then to flip it and think of our defenses. How do we think of what is important to defend, how to defend that, so that when the attacker does show up, we're a little bit further down the line. And if we think deeply enough about some of the technologies that are coming our way, we're then more prepared for the technology that shows up when it comes our way. Okay. With that in mind, today we're going to talk about two different types of emerging technologies. Right? One that is here today, and one that is truly emerging for the future, but might also be here today. Both of these impact fraud. So let's break apart fraud real quick, right? Fraud is what? An identity and an access problem, right? Are you who you say you are, even if you're not? And can you get your action on objectives? That's the access to the information that you want. That's the mindset of defeating fraud, right? So the first technology, let's talk about AI-generated deepfakes. We had a great discussion here on AI, right? Used usually outward. There's a couple examples of how to defeat fraud, so let's talk about one of those today. But who here is actually, let's start with identity. Who here is actually dealing with identity issues? Show of hands. Okay, great. Keep your hand up if you've actually seen a deepfake work successfully in a banking transaction. Okay, just a handful. All right, well, let's change that.
Hello, thank you for calling Credit Union. This call may be recorded. My name is Margaret. How can I help you?
Hi, my name is and I'm calling to cancel my account.
I'm sorry to hear that. I see you aren't calling from a number on record, so we'll need to take a few steps to confirm your identity. Could we start with your account number?
I'm traveling right now, so I don't have my statements, and I can't log into the app because I don't have my phone with me. Is there anything else we can do to pull up my account?
Oh, no, I'm sorry. I guess we won't be able to confirm a code sent to you either. We'll need to confirm your identity before we can take action on your account. Can you confirm your address and billing zip code for me?
I just moved, but my old address and my billing zip code is 2.
Thank you. And could you tell me the last 4 digits of your social security number?
Sure.
Thank you. While I look up your account, could you tell me a bit about why you want to cancel your account?
I'm moving, and I won't have access to the credit union.
Thank you for that information. Just to let you know, we waive ATM fees outside of the state, so you could still use your account wherever you're moving.
Thanks, but I'm not really interested.
I understand. One last question for you. Could you tell me a couple of recent transactions on your credit card ending in...
I'm not sure. I think I used it to pay for a couple of Amazon orders, and I know I've used it at the Green Valley grocery store.
Perfect. Thank you. I see that the owner of the account is Mix. Am I speaking to Mix?
Yes, that's me.
We're sorry to see you go. I understand that you want to have a cashier's check with the full amount mailed to you. We'll send that to the address on file.
Actually, like I said, I just moved. Can you send that to my new address instead?
All right, we can do that. Because the address is not on record, we'll need to send that signature on delivery. Is that okay?
Yes, that's fine.
Great. And what's the address you'd like it sent to? Great. Please know that if you change your mind, you can reopen your account and keep your current status level within 30 days. Is there anything else I can help you with?
No, that's all. Thank you for all of your help. I've enjoyed being a member, and if I ever move back, I'm sure I'll make a new account.
I'm glad to hear that, and thank you for banking with us for the past years. If there's anything else you need, please call back within the next 30 days. Have a great one.
Thanks, I hope you do too.
So what did we just hear here? That was a successful customer-to-bank interaction. But it was not a human-to-human interaction. You can see where this is going, but there's a twist. That was the voice for the customer was a AI-generated voice. What's also interesting that we did not expect was that the bank was also using an AI-generated voice. So what we actually saw here when we did this a couple days ago, right before the conference, while we were at the conference, was a machine-to-machine interaction successfully completing the interaction and passing all identity checks. So how did that work? Well, relatively simply. We took a researcher on our team who had zero background in AI generation, zero. Heard of it, right, like most of us, but didn't know much about it. Gave them the parameters of, pick an identity, take 1 hour of online video, right, of that particular identity to train a model, pick a model, use it, deploy it, and then use publicly accessible information to get the know your customer piece. That took 8 hours of time and $11. That's 1 workday and a cup of coffee, depending where you live. Maybe 2 in other places. That's it. That's all it took. How did this work? Effectively rented a tool for $11, scraped audio of the individual, created the voice that's required, right? So you had a realistic voice that then had the mannerisms and intonation of that individual that could then pass the identity, right? Then using publicly available information, pulled last 4 of the social security number, another publicly available facts. And in 8 hours and $11 later, we had this. You know the hardest part of doing this? The absolute hardest part? Getting permission. That's right. No fraud was actually performed during the making of this example. We had permission from the individual to do it. So the voice you heard of the person, that was not that person, but that person gave us permission to do it because naturally we're researchers, we're not fraudsters. But what does this actually mean, right? Oh, and by the way, that's something the attacker is not going to do. So effectively framing the problem in terms of somewhere around $11 and 8 hours worth of work, they too can do this. So what does this mean for us? It's relatively trivial to do. Where in our organizations do we have customer-to-bank relationships, financial institution-to-financial institution relationships? Where else are we relating in terms of identity, where we need to prove we are who we say we are, even though we're not, and have defensive mechanisms around those particular areas to ensure that the identity checks actually work? Get to that in a minute. So now let's move on to the second part, which is access. So one way to ensure access to critical information and data is through encryption, data encryption, right? And most of us use various different types of data encryption. And we think our data is secure because it's encrypted, naturally. But here's where we might be wrong. How many people have actually heard of or understand the concept of, wait for it, quantum computing? Anybody understand the concept of 1, 2-ish? Great. So of those, how many understand the impact on data security from quantum? Okay, let's walk through this. So in today's world, we use something called classical cryptography under classical computing, right? So we encrypt our data. We won't go through the math. It's relatively hard. It's linear algebra, but it's fairly straightforward, but we won't get into that today. What's important is what we're doing. We encrypt the actual data, and given the mechanisms in which we're encrypting it, given the algorithms we're using, that data is theoretically to be cracked in somewhere between a couple hundreds to thousands to millions of years, depending on what type of encryption you're using, the algorithms, and of course, the computing power you put against trying to crack it, right? That's today's cryptography. Yep. Okay, the example we're going to use here today is RSA 1024, right? So this is today. With quantum computing, using algorithms that are available today, we just don't have an operating system or a computer to put it on yet. That same data can be broken in 14 days after quantum computing is available. Now again, the caveat here is RSA 1024 using the algorithms that we're using today. This period of time is called quantum supremacy. This is the problem. Well, unless you're the attacker, it's the solution. What does this mean, right? Quantum supremacy, theoretically for us, is the time at which quantum overtakes classical algorithms and is used to crack those algorithms, right? So just to be clear, this is at time quantum computing is available using today's available algorithms. Within 14 days, you can crack RSA 1024, right? Okay. But that's not necessarily the problem so much. There are two use cases here for the attacker that's making this really challenging for us in financial institutions and banking, right? One is we continue to use data encryption that's not quantum safe. And at time when quantum computing is available and today's algorithms, if not improved upon, right, can crack it in a very short period of time. The second is that data is captured today in its encrypted form. It is stored until quantum computing is available, and today's algorithms are thrown against it. And then it's broken, and we have access. These are the things we think about. So who has the advantage here? Is it the attacker, or is it the institution? And therein lies the tussle, right? So in both scenarios, we have an element of technology that's coming our way. If we chase the technology that's coming our way, right, and all of the technology that's coming our way, each individual example, it will be mind-numbing to try to come up with solutions. So what does the new technology really represent for us as institutions? It really represents a way of thinking about the way the attacker is going to use it against us, and think through what's important for us as defenders and what's important, and double down on what's important. So Rather than chasing the technology, we think, what's important to protect? Internal communications, client-to-client relationships, our critical assets, right? Our data, our users, our networks. And focusing on the type of technologies that can keep that information safe so that when the new technology shows up, we have a way of addressing it and are way down the road to at least being slightly more resilient. That's all I have for today. Any questions? Sure. I'm sorry? Who has access today? That's a great question. So the question is, who has access to quantum computers today? Right now, there's only a couple in existence. The challenge is the operating system that sits on top of it. So the stack looks like the actual quantum computer, the operating that sits on top of it, and then the ability to run programs and algorithms on top of it. Right now, there's one at IBM, sort of. There's another one that I don't know I can actually say. I think they made a public announcement. The other is Champaign-Urbana, and maybe others know others. The University of Illinois at Champaign-Urbana has one as well. So those are three sort of in existence. I don't know of any operating systems that are available yet today. So I think maybe the underlying question is, how soon will quantum supremacy be here? Theoretically, a couple years. Realistically, I'm certainly not an expert on that topic. Other questions?
Since AI is moving very fast towards this deepfake stuff, are we better off backtracking to, and I don't want to say facial recognition because we know of countries that are using a lot of facial recognition to identify people, but is my thumb now my most safe piece, and the way that my bank or my whatever app that I'm using would be the best way for me to protect myself? My thumbprint? Mm-hmm.
That's a great question. So the question really revolves around, how do we prove our identity and are biometrics the way to go? So the short answer is, the more data that we can collect let me say this this way, to prove identity, the more factors we can use that may or may not be publicly available and or may not be replicatable at this point in time, would be the solution set to look through, right? So the short answer is yes, as part, but until somebody can defeat any type of biometric. And then there are also other concerns tangentially on biometrics. We've learned about retina scans, very, very, very hard to replicate. However, there's health implications to tracking people's retinas, right? The eye scans, you can actually tell certain health issues they may have, which then moves us into health-protected information. So there are complications around them. But broadly, from a defensive standpoint, we think through, what do we need to do to prove identity, right? The more factors that we can ask that may or may not be publicly available, the safer we are. This is the concept of multi-factor authentication, but very similar to what we saw here in the AI-generated voice. You could see the bank was asking last four of social. Well, that's public information. That's also a factor. She wanted to send a code to the device, right, which we normally use to authenticate now. But the AI-generated customer had said, I had moved, I don't have that phone anymore, defeating that mechanism, and asked for another piece of information, which would be, look, what did you use on your credit card? Well, Amazon's the first choice, because who here does not use Amazon? But you see how all of a sudden we have to think through the defeat mechanism to each one of those. So biometrics could be one, but more and more pieces that we would know. Here's something very interesting that might be really relevant to our day-to-day interactions, right? One way to think about this is to really defeat what's coming down from voice, AI-generated voice recognition would be something only you and that other person would know. So for example, let's say, Steve and Jane met or had a Zoom call, or they saw each other at some point. And Jane's a CFO, let's just say, and calls back and says, hey, I need you to move that money real quick. Something seems a little fishy. What were you wearing, or when did we last see each other? AI would not know that, but you would. She would. Multi-factor. At this point. Yeah. Did that help? Okay, sir.
Thanks for all that you have said. My question is, excuse me, is it possible that you are a deep fake?
That I am indeed fake?
Yeah.
We thought about that. I thought about going back here and having a recording and then answering it. No, so at this point, outside of some great video generation, I am actually here. Thank you for the question. But how do you know that I'm actually here? And how do I know that you're actually here, that I'm actually here? Yep. But that's the world we live in, right? Like, at what point do you trust but verify? And at what point do those verifications sit to say, okay, I'm satisfied with this verification that we are indeed, the person who we say we are, right? This is the challenge. Oh, sorry. Who engineers these cyber attacks, and why don't we stop? Okay. Oh, great question. So this is from the attacker side. Who? Well, first of all, attribution, very hard, right? The example I just gave was one of an ethical hacker, hired by us with permission, that's the ethical part, to do this, and it took that little time. There are, in the world of, let's just say, in the world of hackers, right, there's defenders and attackers. In the world of attackers, there are those doing it for ethical purposes, which is to help institutions increase their resilience. That's what we do as a living, right? And then there are those that don't. This question sits in that space. Criminals, nation-state actors, hacktivists, it's hard to characterize them into one space. At the root level, it is an individual that has an action they want to take and are willing to take action for that particular objective to achieve an end result, which could be defacing somebody. This was the video deepfakes we see every once in a while, right? Just to discredit. There could be criminal activity used for fraud, right? We want to extract information from a banking institution or somewhere else. We want to move money. So, like in the criminal world, under U.S. under U.S. Code Title 18 and then others in international areas, right? It's theft of some sort of property, right? In the nation-state world, it's national security and an advantage, right? In the hacktivist world, it's who knows. So who are they? Could be anyone. It's not me. So we can eliminate that person. But it was a great question. What else? Sure.
Today in a quantum computing world?
Terrific. So the question was, what can we be doing today to prevent attacks in a quantum computing world? I'll take the first part first and address the actual technology. First, the way we look at the world from a cyber resilience standpoint is know what's critical. Trying not to say critical assets because we hear that way too often. But the reality is know what's important, and what we mean by that is have a good definition of what we mean important is. Most banks and financial institutions do, right? It means financial, reputation, lost work, legal fees, and fines, and regulatory fines, and incident response costs. Those pieces, there's a rubric out there, NIST IR 7621 is a good one, right? Mutually exclusive categories of impact to the business. What assets do we have in terms of data, users, devices, and access do we have that has material impact on the business? And if we know that, we know where those assets are, which is really hard, by the way, very hard, and we understand where they are, who has access to them, and we're building defenses around that, then the attention goes to what do we need to protect? And then whatever threat or vulnerability comes at us, we're better prepared for it because it's an orthogonal problem, right? It's not linear to just one set of attacks or one set of threats or one set of vulnerabilities or likelihood or any of those pieces. So if we're thinking deeply enough about our problem space, which is defending what's important, then we don't have to turn our attention to defending things that aren't necessarily as important, right? We all need a priority schema. That's one way to look at it. If we're thinking about our problem space in that way, then when it comes to the emerging technologies that come down, like quantum computing, we're further down the path. So for example, quantum computing, one way to defend ourselves, the immediate way in this particular example from a data access standpoint would be putting in quantum safe encryption today, or as soon as feasibly possible. That way, at least we know the data that we do have quantum safe encrypting happening now. When it does show up, we're better prepared for it. Yeah. Effectively, what's happening is with quantum computing, what it's doing is coming ahead of the classical computing, right? It's basically creating a value that goes into create a coprime. That's the hard part. That's the secret part in encryption that can then generate the key pair. Like currently, our cryptography has an assumption that that's a really hard value to get, and it is, until quantum shows up. Then it's trivial. That's the problem that's the risk that's going to come our way with quantum computing. Yeah. But it comes back to the data assets at risk. Yeah. Thanks. With the risks you have demonstrated, why are some banks still using voice recognition to identify clients for online transactions? It's a great question. I don't have a particular answer, but given the response that we saw today during the AI discussion, operational efficiency, right? It's actually a really useful tool. And notice in this transaction, which was a bit of a surprise for us, the bank was using it to make themselves more relatable to us. We happened to call during sort of off-peak hours from the bank time. They were in a different a different location, and we're using AI-generated voice to sound like the culture of the client who's calling, right? We've seen this before. We didn't expect it, which was the funny part. So why are they still using it? For that reason. So the real question here is, for online transactions, we need to spread out, what would be helpful to do is to spread out the information that is required. You can still use voice recognition as one piece, we talked about from the biometric side, but other pieces to verify identity, right? We saw the big defeat that we that demonstrated here. The distinguishing mark was they couldn't send the code to the individual, and that was the defeat. Oh, I changed my phone number. Okay, in that particular case, right, the bank said, okay, that's okay, we'll just use something else, which would be the credit card transaction, which is easier to beat. So, which is helpful to think through the attacker standpoint. They're going to keep going until they get their action on objective, right? So if we can't send a code, we'll make up a reason where we don't have it, and then we'll try to push into something we do know. So why are banks using it? For operational efficiency, how to protect against it, spread out the amount of pieces that it takes to pass identity checks. Last question. What is the interesting example of how you've helped an institution access their vulnerabilities or prevent an attack? Well, pick your network. That's what we actually do for a living. So probably the most interesting example would be something we all rely on. There is a variety of networks that we rely on. We were called in recently to help prove that what we rely on could actually be broken. And it was told that absolutely could not be broken. So we demonstrated a couple tools that demonstrated how it could be broken. I'm being vague here for obvious reasons. And then we immediately thought, oh, this is where it hits this place and goes to that place, to be very vague. Which then we had a way of thinking, oh, that's how the attacker is going to do that. Let's put one defense here that will eliminate not only that attack, but classes of attacks off of that. It was an authentication mechanism. And, you know, at least for the next theoretically 4 to 5 to 6 years, that attack and classes like it will not happen. That's probably the best example. And with that, I'm out of time. Thank you very much for your attention and your questions. I really appreciate it. Thanks.